Welcome one and all to the Gaming Codex, the show where I try to explain to you all the various terms used within the video games industry. And today we have a big one: frame rate. According to the general definition, frame rate is the frequency at which consecutive images called frames are displayed in an animated display. The term applies equally to film and video cameras, computer graphics, and motion capture systems. Frame rate may also be called the frame frequency and be expressed in hertz. Some people will also call it FPS and write it FPS, not F/S like it should be, to cause confusion. Yes, frame rate. In the beginning, we did not have what you would call frame rate. We would have displays and systems that could generally only render out individual characters in quick succession. That was the days of the text mode, when you would have to wait for the screen to fill up line by line, character by character, in order to get your picture, or mostly your text, or your text with graphic blocks on it that sort of made it look like a picture. But as time moved on, we did eventually get to graphics modes, which did indeed feature what you would call a frame rate. Naturally, it wasn't high at first, it was quite low, maybe 5, but as time went on and as technology advanced, especially since people started to understand how they could program better, frame rate increased, and that was seen by everybody that's alive and human as being a positive occurrence. Because frame rate is not just about what you see, it's about how you interact with the game. For example, a game that runs at 15 frames a second, like Ultima Underworld, is playable, but honestly, if it were running at a higher frame rate, your movement would be a lot smoother. If the game's internal logic also ran at a higher frame rate, it would have been a lot better to play. In terms of fluidity, because that game was an amazing masterpiece of its age. Still is. Of course, not all games require a very high frame rate. Turn-based strategy games, ones that do not actually allow the player to exert direct control over anything, generally don't need a high frame rate. Some of them may just have a static picture upon which something moves from time to time, so you can just have a frame rate of, for the most part, none. But in games where you do have direct control, especially games that rely a lot on fast movement, on fast reaction times, on action in general, shooters, slashers, kickers, punchers, sponge kickers and kick punchers, games that are all about movement, those truly respond better to a higher frame rate, because a higher frame rate does give you more control. It applies to driving games as well, not just kick punching games. And how high does your frame rate actually have to be in order to get the full effect? Well, that depends on your display. If your screen can't do more than 60, then just about anything you do over 60 is a bit wasted, because those frames will not be displayed, and jamming them in the display may actually cause some tearing issues. But if you do have a display that can output, 120 to 240, you're gonna notice the difference, you're gonna feel it. It is something quite tangible. Now, what is the popular definition of frame rate? That would be the thing on the screen that makes the pictures. And yes, that is absolutely correct. It is the thing on the screen that makes the pictures. Frame rate is probably one of the things that least needs to be explained for people to understand the concept, because it's very noticeable. When you don't have a good frame rate, the game will look like ass, it will control like ass, it will move like absolute ass. And now that I've said ass 4 times, YouTube will probably flag this video like all the others. And yet people do often argue about frame rate. And not in the way we used to about 15 years ago, where we said, well, in 3D Mark 2000, I got about 50 frames a second on that helicopter test, which I'd say is okay, and someone else would say, I want 100. Anything under 100 is crap. Now we're sort of shifted into a different territory, which is a bit tied into the marketing definition of frame rate, and that is best at 30 depending on the console generation. Now the funny bit about this is that previous console generations have had quite a few games that ran at 60. 360. And not just PS3 and Xbox 360, but previous console generations, like the PS2, the Nintendo 64, the NES. I'm not entirely sure what the deal was with the Atari 2600, but I remember the games being often quite fast, some of them at least. But in today's market, things are a bit different because a lot of the newer hardware cannot actually output a good frame rate at the maximum resolution of 1080p. They will instead opt to do 30 frames a second at 900p, or some actually do render out at 1080p. And because admitting that they can't do 60 would be saying our console is not as good as you would expect it to be, marketing has gone the way of let's make people hate 60 frames a second. Let's call 60 frames a second bad. Let's say it destroys the experience of actually playing the game. Let's say the 30 is better, more cinematic, it's better suited for games, it's closer to a movie. You know, abject lies that whenever you hear repeated, you, as a human being, sort of feel the need to say bullshit. Again, this video will probably not get monetized because that's what it is. It's just not debatable. It's like saying, well, maybe plants actually grow better in complete darkness. Yeah, photosynthesis can work with darkness too, right? I mean, there's darkness photons that make all the plants grow. No, 60 is abjectly better than 30. It looks smoother because it is smoother, and it plays smoother because it is smoother. And because most displays now are locked at 60, it's the way to go. Now, if displays were locked at 120, 144, 160, 240, 300, oh boy, would that be an arms race. Just imagine that if someone came out now with a console that can output 120 frames a second in a state-of-the-art game, and the market was flooded with displays that were 120 Hz, marketing people would probably get whiplash from having to contradict themselves in case their own companies start doing the same thing. Oh, and by the way, VR does need more than 30. You can't really VR properly at 30. You would not have a fun experience. So closes this edition of the Gaming Codex. Come back next time when we will discuss another topic related to video games. And by discuss, I mean I'm gonna rant about it, and you will then tell me in the comments what I missed. Goodbye.